Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on aging brain. We have our world famous speaker, Dr. Edward, uh, Mr. David Speed, and Professor Dr. Talib. First, I would like to give chance to Dr. Edward.
Well, thank you. This is a very interesting topic and a topic that means a lot to me personally because I have an aging brain. And I know other people who have aging brains as well. But I thought I might start by sort of framing for your audience what we mean by an aging brain. Aging is, of course, a process that goes on with the entire body, and I can talk about that a little bit more in context because there's a lot of good work being done on anti-aging. But there are a couple of specific things about what happens to your brain as you get older. And I'm going to focus on three particular things, and then talk about some good news, some slightly good news for aging people like me. First of all, over time, our ability to process information slows down. And in other words, tasks that we could do much faster than when we were young become much slower. And part of the reason is that the so-called white matter in the brain, which includes the axons. Basically, there's a film that covers these axons, and they start degenerating, meaning the speed of the signals going, in your brain and throughout your whole system slow down. So over time, because you have problems or you have degeneration of the so-called white matter in your brain, aging brains tend to be a little bit slower. It's not they can't do things, it's just that it's a little bit slower than with younger people. The second thing that happens in an aging brain is memory problems. You walk into a room to do something and you say, wait a minute, why did I come into this room? Believe me, people like me have had this situation. I'm sure many others have had it. Or you have problems remembering what's called episodic things. I can still remember certain facts. I can remember 1 and 1 is 2 and so forth. But okay, let's see. When did I go to that meeting? Was it last week or was it week before? In other words, things that happen to you, which is called episodic memory, becomes less efficient. And part of that is because of the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of the brain, actually it's two little pieces that put down memories. And the hippocampus shrinks over time. So the aging brain has memory problems, especially for what we call episodic memory. The third thing that happens to an aging brain concerns the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex controls what we call the executive functions in the brain. The executive functions is kind of the management functions. It in terms of things like attention. Actually, see, my brain is not working right now because I can't remember what I was about to say. No, things like attention or being able to balance tasks in your brain or being able to multitask. And that's because over time, the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, shrinks as much as 50% over time. So the reason why you have these problems is because of a biological thing. By the way, let me give you an example of how executive functions and focus can change. I'm going to give you an example right here for your audience. So you can see what it looks like, okay? Ending aging is a very interesting thing, and I thank Sharif for bringing this topic up. In fact, there's a famous book on ending aging by Aubrey de Grey. And I'm going to be hosting Aubrey de Grey at Freedom Fest this year. He's one of the top pioneers in aging. Freedom Fest is really fun. It's a lot of free market people getting together in Las Vegas. It's really fun. My kids love it. My kids, when they went to last year's, they called it Free Food Fest because they went all around. There are all these tables and everyone's giving away free candy. So my kids loved it. Okay. See what I just did there? That was my executive function malfunctioning. I was supposed to be talking about a particular topic that Sharif brought up, right? The aging brain. And then I started to get off and talk about this conference where someone's going to be talking about aging. And then I thought of the thing about the conference. I talked about my kids. I talked about candy. See, that's what happens when your executive function is not working properly. Now, I want to make one more thing before we go on to our other panelists. When your brain ages, there are certain things that remain okay. And in fact, you can get better. And one of the things that you can get better on is, remember, as you age, if you really have an active brain, you get more information in your brain. Again, think of a computer where, you have very little data and then you have a whole lot of data, right? And the more data you get, the better you're going to be at certain things. And again, not just talking about the science behind it, studies behind it, but one of the things, for example, I personally find I can do better is if someone starts talking about something, I can suddenly see all of the 12 connections and how they all fit together, because I've been doing these things all my life. And so I say, yes, I understand this process because I've been watching it for decades. And I understand now how it fits with this process because I've been watching that for decades. So I have something going on in my brain that is a little bit better than in their brain. So now I'm going to go ahead and stop there. There's some other things I can say about what you can do if you have an aging brain like I do, and like every listener on this show is going to have eventually, what you can do about it and how you can compensate for some of the problems. And in fact, you have certain advantages that you can work on as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, listen to the other speakers, and rest my aging brain for a few minutes. You're muted.
Mr. David Smith. Yes.
Well, thank you. My aged brain was trying to read your lips there, so we'll see how that can go. Edward did a great job of beginning to set the stage for what we have here, because our aging brain, our aging body is actually good, because that means we're still alive and that we're still functioning, and that those are things that we have to do there. But most people, as they enter midlife, your brain changes in ways that are really measurable. Your brain begins overall to shrink when you're in your 30s or 40s. And about the time you turn 60, it begins to increase the shrinkage. And this brain shrinkage doesn't happen to all areas of the brain at once. And some areas shrink more or faster than others. And that's part of what happened. Edward talked about the frontal cortex shrinking, where a lot of the executive functions are. And that most people begin to understand when they have changes in their ability to read cognitive processes. And sometimes those cognitive processes will slow down as you're aging and working there. It's normal to experience these changes, though, as you age, and it's something that is actually good. And you also see things where thinning part of it is noticeable in parts of the temporal lobe, which this is the part that is located behind your ears. And one of the key functions there is it helps you connect words together too. And that is one of the places. But aging with your brain actually has very positive things that you can see on that too. Because despite the changes you have in cognition that may come with age, older adults, and I tend to like the word older as opposed to old, older adults can still do many of the things they've enjoyed their whole lives. You can learn new skills, you form new memories, you improve vocabulary and language skills. And in many places, you see that those are skills that actually increase. I believe that older people have the ability to excel with how they begin to do their cognitive capabilities of synthesis. I believe you get wisdom more as you begin to do this, because in some ways, the mind has to function and focus more than you had to in the past. But it's not just the shrinkage. What you see is happening is the blood flow to regions of the brain decreases, and that blood flow is part of what many people think is partly responsible for an aging brain. You also see that in certain regions of the brain, communications between the neurons may not be as effective. And that is something. And then inflammation of the brain. We can do that. We can be, the inflammation can come from trauma. It can come from different ways of what we do. It can come from disease. It can come from self-inflicted pain. I joke with people. When I was in my teens, I was a roadie running audio for some rock and roll bands. And that was a crazy time. And I've told people since then that all my memory brain cells from that time are dead. So don't ask me about the rock and roll days. But you see those type of things. But it's, to me, amazing. 12 years ago today, I was accepted into the Society of Design and Process Engineering Sciences as a fellow. And I can remember the details of that really well. But on the other hand, I sometimes struggle with some of the details of something that was 30 days ago. And you begin to see that it's that there are some scientific studies that suggest that our brain only has, well, I'm going to say brain generically, because it's not just the brain, it's the rest of your nervous system and the rest of your body too, because RNA strands have a very important part of memory and a very important part of processing. But that those only have so much, I'm going to use computer terms here, so much active memory.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
thank you, sir.
Then as our body goes on, we have near-term memory, and then we have more permanent memory in computers. I think our brain does the same thing. And from looking at the scientific studies with that, it shows there. And so there's techniques to exercise your brain to improve this. There's some vitamins, minerals you can take to improve this. But I'm sure we can touch upon those as we go on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Dr. Edward, actually, my audience, they want to know more about this aging research. If you share with them some background, who is the best scientist, who did what, and some reference, some book, maybe it will be helpful for academic students.
Yeah. Well, yes, to your audience, and by the way, Sharif has picked a very important topic, as he always does, because the reason why this discussion is important is because people are living longer. In the past, because we had much shorter lifespans, mainly because medicine was not very good. There were people who lived to 80 or 90 years old, but there weren't very many of them. It really didn't matter about the aging brain because there are so few people out there who were aging at a good pace and had a good brain. And you might also say that, and this, I don't want to get into this in too much detail, but there are evolutionary reasons why we have certain mechanisms in our body that protect against certain challenges, and why we don't have certain mechanisms. And for example, very few people in the past had Alzheimer's. Very few people even reached the age where that would be an issue. So the reason why this discussion is very important is for exactly the reason that Sharif mentioned, is that the last 20 to 25 years has seen an explosion in research on aging itself. In other words, when you talk about aging, what do you mean? Well, most of your listeners probably think, well, people just sort of get older. You all probably, some of your audience might be older, some of your audience might be younger, and they're looking at their parents or their grandparents. But what exactly is aging at a biological level? And that's where some incredible research has been done over the last decade, a couple of decades. I'll call to your attention, for example, Aubrey de Grey is considered one of the great pioneers in aging research. This is his book, Ending Aging. And what he does is he breaks down aging into, I think it's 7 categories. What happens to mitochondria? The mitochondria in your cells, are like the little power engines. They take materials and make it into the energy that powers your body. What happens over time to mitochondria? And he has a whole analysis of here's what happens and why mitochondria doesn't function as well. Or what happens to your cells. This thing called the Hayflick limit, where it looks like our cells will divide and divide and divide. And then after about 50 divisions, your cells won't divide anymore. And so they kind of just are there, and you don't have renewal. Why is that? Well, there's been a lot of good work done with, let's see, here we go. Bill Andrews is one of the pioneers working on telomeres. And telomeres are these little things at the end of your chromosomes. And every time your cell reproduces, the telomere gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And when the telomeres disappear, your DNA, you might think of it as your chromosomes kind of unravel and they don't do anything anymore. The point is this. People like Aubrey de Grey have looked at exactly what happens biologically with aging. There's another thing called a zombie cell. When a cell dies, a lot of times they just kind of disintegrate and go out of your system, but other times they're still there and they're still putting out toxins that harm other cells. So what he does, what Aubrey does, is basically look at all these different aspects of aging, and then he tries to develop what he calls a SENS strategy. SENS means strategies for engineering negligible senescence. What that means in English or any other major language is you can't. We still don't have the ability to take all of the intricate aspects of aging okay, go back. Sorry, there. Wasn't my brain at the time; it was the software, I think. Engineering strategies, for example, with telomeres. There's been work done. The telomerase is an enzyme that's been sequenced now. It can probably be used to keep your telomeres growing. I'm sorry, keep going out. Anyway, another book I'll mention for your readers who want the best overview of aging research, I would suggest The Science and Technology of Growing Young by Sergey Young. Very easy to remember. Young wrote a book about being young. And this goes over, he has some different, I think he has 9 factors that he associates with aging. But if you read those books, and if you're interested in this topic, you've got to understand the aging brain in the context of everything that's happening with aging generally for the rest of your bodies. There's certain unique things that are happening in the neurons and cells, for example, that we can deal with, and you'll read them in these books. So for your audience that's very interested in these things, I would suggest this. And when it comes around next time, I can talk a little bit about some of the things that some of the technology that can do something about the aging brain.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, yes.
Edward is so right about this there, and Aubrey is a really thought leader in this, not only in the aging brain, but regenerative ways to extend life expectancy as well. And I love listening to him at Raid Fest and others like that as he goes into it and following his research. And that's one of the things you can do. There's actually a lot of research out there. There's a source called ResearchGate that I use pretty often to keep up with where I'm going. And there's a publication that I posted in the private chat on this that is the uh, Aging Brain Recent Research and Concepts. That is a very good source for someone wanting to dive deeper into this, uh, because it covers many of the concepts that Edward is talking about, and it really goes deeper into a lot of the other ones. Some of the places that you see a lot of research in right now is what are the morphological changes that happen to the aging brain. We've talked about some of the cellular and some cellular, the volume loss on there, but you also see things like the white matter. The white matter tends to decrease more as we get older, and really some fantastic research going into that, and how the reduction in the different areas of the brain work to it. You see, as I mentioned earlier, the age-related changes in the neurons and the loss of some of the connectivity going in it. But then you begin to see some other research that is in something that calls tangles. And part of the brain that happens as you get older is you begin to get these neurological tangles in your brain. And a good analogy of that is if you think about, for example, the ropes you use on a boat to tie it up and to the dock. The older that rope gets, the more it frays, the more you see tangles in it, the more it gets places where it won't straighten out anymore. Our brain does the same thing. And that is an area of intense research right now, trying to find out the impact and roles of tangles, and are there things that can be done in it, and particularly with the density. But the ways that we see uh, an aging brain accelerate is the role of stress, the role of mental stress, the role of oxidation stress is one of the big elements in there. There's genetic changes that happen. Edward was talking about the tails of the DNA get short. You see that in that DNA damages increases with age. And I personally know 7 or 8 researchers who are focusing on that role, both in mental and brain genetic changes, but also general body genetic changes on how that's affecting our aging. We see different chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, all of these decrease. We see other chemicals dramatically decrease as we age and begin to go in there and affect our aging brain. And we see cognitive changes in our brain. There is something that in healthcare, in medicine, is called a cognitive reserve. And this is our ability to look at how to stimulate our brain, and has driven to the market of many different applications that have been developed now, Sharif, to help exercise your brain, so that as you age, these brain training tools can help slow the decline of some of the chemicals, some of the reactions, but really to help you establish more of a cognitive reserve in your brain. And I can just do a search on brain training software, brain training tools, and you'll get hundreds of different hits of applications for that work. You'll get also you will see many vitamins and things coming out that can be applied to that as well. Edward, I was almost to go into my other room and bring mine back of some of the vitamins I take to keep my brain alive too. But there's also an old saying that goes too many places. If you don't use it, you lose it. You see that with muscle mass. You see that with other things too. The same thing's true with your mental capabilities. Uh, you need to continue to use it. You need to continue to keep up. And just like youth are born and need to learn their social and emotional capabilities, as we age, we need to refresh and update our social and emotional capabilities as well. And all of these are things that affect the aging brain.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Edward, my questions to you, especially from our audience, like, uh, how does the brain compensate for aging? Like, if you share some explanations and experience,
Well,
or yeah.
mhm. Well, David has covered a lot of it. Occasionally, I'll turn my camera off so I don't have a problem with bandwidth here. Bandwidth in my computer, not bandwidth in my brain. That's a different issue. Yeah, I mean, David, I think is correct. And the point I was going to make is that we now know that just like a physical muscle, if you don't use it, you lose it. You have the same thing with the brain, and especially the aging brain, because there has been good research done on the sort of things that keep the brain going. Obviously, the first one is to keep your brain active. In other words, not to become passive, always to be learning, always to find interest in something in life, because that does help you biologically, not just in terms of what you're thinking and so forth. It helps you biologically, and so that's the first thing I would say. You find that if you look at people who tend to have healthier brains, and again, there's studies on this, they tend to be people that are more active, that use their brain, and that especially things of interest in life. It might be family. It might be, if you're older, it might be your children or your grandchildren, or or whatever. Or always be interested in new topics. Always learning. I'm always learning. To give you a personal example. By the way, another book I would highly recommend is Lifespan by David Sinclair, and he talks especially about the epigenetic aspects of aging. That's one of his specialties. So I suggest this book highly as well. But that's one of the things that really keeps your brain healthy and exercised. I will mention also that because we're talking about chemicals and we're talking about real biology, a lot of us take what are called nootropics. This is one I've taken before. I'm actually trying a different one because we know that there are certain things, that certain chemicals or certain medications that keep the brain, that keep the neurons healthier and so forth. My poor mom has Alzheimer's, and unfortunately, she's 90 years old. There are no cures for Alzheimer's. There's not even a way to effectively treat it. At best, you can kind of slow the process. That at least slow the process down a little bit, and hopefully in the future we'll discover ways to deal with that in a better way. But taking nootropics, I think, is something people who have aging brains could look into. I'll mention two other interesting things. There we go. You can hear me. By the way, if you see my picture, I don't have myself live, but you can see me with my two little twin girls. That was from a few years ago. That's certainly interested in life, in raising twins. Okay, but I want to mention two other things. One is, for example, since I mentioned Alzheimer's, the CRISPR-Cas9 genetic editing tool has been used experimentally to turn off the production of tau proteins in neurons in the brain, in a brain. It's the clumping of tau proteins in neurons that's one of the things associated with Alzheimer's. So, for example, using CRISPR-Cas9 genetic editing tool is a possible way in the future we'll be able to turn off Alzheimer's. There's a lot of other complicated things going on there, but I want to bring that to your attention. Again, if you're in the Asia Pacific area and you want to be a researcher into aging, and especially aging brain, there's a lot of interesting things.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. David Smith.
And as many of you know, Musk and there's other people as well, have experimented with hooking up the brain to a computer, or hooking up the brain, for example, so somebody who, what's it called, locked-in syndrome. There are people who simply, their brain is working fine, but they cannot move a muscle. They cannot speak. They can't do anything. And there's been experiments with hooking up the brain to some kind of neuro link so that the person can simply think and essentially write letters and communicate. And of course, this particular technology right now, has a very limited use. But I think as researchers look at the technology and look for ways to apply it, we're going to learn even more about the brain and what we can do to keep it healthy and to head off some of the problems of aging. So again, it's a very exciting time for this.
Thank you, sir. Mr. David Smith.
You're muted, David.
See, that's one of the functions of the aging brain again. You begin to say what's there and what's not there, but to me, getting older, one of the things that I see is you adapt to the processes. And there's time where I know I have to focus more to understand it. The ability to look at how to understand cognitive decline, the science has gotten so much better. Edward mentioned Elon Musk's Neurological company. Their headquarters is about a mile from my house here. And we see what's happening there, being able to have really great impact going forward. In the past, we've done experiments at different places where we've had to do implants, and that makes a difference. And we're seeing that. But with the growth of our ability to begin to edit the genome, that's going to help us even with brain aging. The other thing I want to say about the brain, and I'm using this more broadly than just brain aging, is that some of the research that's been done with some of my peers, I find very interesting. There is research being done in something called superintelligence. And what they're finding is one of the key elements in superintelligence is the number of connections and pathways between the left side of your brain and the right side of the brain. People who have superintelligence, the people who can do synthesis more, who can connect the dots more, and make higher level complex decisions, tend to have more connections from the left hemisphere of the brain to the right hemisphere of the brain, and be able to do those type of processes. Well, the aging brain actually begins to impact on that too. Many older people see the vision begins to suffer. And one of the reasons your vision begins to suffer is as you age, the muscles and tendons and things around your eyes begin to dry up. And that causes changes in your and how you can focus the images on your retina. Those same changes that happen in the eye that causes you as you get older to put on reading glasses and other stuff like this is the same thing that's happening to your brain. And so I personally, I've had problems with a retina detachment and a retina tear, and have had surgery on those. So I take extra amino acids and things to maintain the health of those areas around my eyes. Those same type of amino acids and the same type of with different formulations work with your brain as well. And so it seems that Edward and I both take some of the same materials to help our aging body, particularly on the cognitive level and on the ability to see and focus, take the same thing. So you have to do that with your body. I actually tell most of my friends that are approaching 50s that they need to begin to start taking vitamins for their eyes and vitamins for their brain. And I can tell you, I've seen the result from people who've done that, and actually reversals of some of the drying and happen, so better vision and stuff even. So there's things we can do. There's things we can do even over the counter that will dramatically help with this. How we eat, how we handle stress, and others are ones that will help us maintain higher degrees of functioning for our aging brain. And outside of a disease or a trauma, I think there's a lot we can do to help slow the aging of our brains, and in many instances, actually reverse part of that aging of the brain.
Yes, Dr. Edward. Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. One thing, like, is there any relation in between dementia and this aging brain tropic? And if it's dementia create this kind of problem, what is the solutions we have?
Well, yeah. Well, from my work, and I don't claim to be the big expert on this, dementia is something at a biological level. From what I gather, and David, maybe you can add to this, it's something that you can inherit the propensity for dementia, which is one of the reasons I should probably get myself checked, because I know my mother has dementia. I know that her sister was actually a half sister. They were both Italian, had it as well. So we know that there tends to be biological propensities, for example, for things like dementia. And so it's not something that's just a matter of like, well, some people get a cold and some people don't. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have any real good solutions to it. We're still working on it. One of the things I do, I've talked about this before, is look at why research labs have such difficulty funding and going ahead with the kind of research we need, for example, to deal with Alzheimer's and things like that. And part of it is we have a regulatory system in this country that has certain defects and inefficiencies in it, and that add to the costs of doing research. And when you have something that's so detailed and it's going to take so much work that it's not going to be something you're going to solve in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. If you have a system that adds cost to the process of research, well, a lot of companies simply don't do it. In fact, I think it was about 3 years ago, I'm going to say beginning of 2018, two of the major pharmaceutical companies, I can't remember if it was Pfizer and another one, just decided they weren't going to put more money into Alzheimer's research. And so this is a very serious issue dealing with dementia. I want to add one thing to what David said. First of all, about chemicals that you use. Acetylcholine, for example, is one that you can get over the counter. There's some others. There's some controversy whether ginkgo biloba actually works very well or not. Okay, fine, we can have that discussion. But there are certain medicines or certain things you can get over the counter that in fact do have some kind of effect. I know that my mom takes acetylcholine. The particular nootropic I'm going to be getting in the mail probably in the next hour or two, I know has acetylcholine in it, so I don't have to buy it independently in the store. One other book I want to recommend, because David was talking about, again, how to keep the brain healthy. There's a very good book called The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler. And Stephen Kotler has co-authored several books with Peter Diamandis, who's one of the great, sort of entrepreneurial folks. And what Kotler does in his book, Kotler actually started working in life, so to speak, as a sports person, looking at extreme sports and looking at what allows certain people to reach the best within them, as we would say. And he's very influenced by research, Csikszentmihalyi, is that how you pronounce it, David? I think he was a Hungarian, Csikszentmihalyi. It's an unpronounceable name, but he did work on what's called flow. Okay, and by that he means hopefully a lot of your listeners have been in that state where you're focused, and you're so focused on some particular thing, the rest of the world seems to drop out because you're so focused on the problem. Your brain seems to be working on all cylinders, you might say, and you have a clarity, and your working is going very, very well. And what he has done is research that state of the brain and what causes it, and how you can actually do exercises so that you can get into the state of flow easier. And this book is not just for people who have aging brains like myself and David there, but it's for people like Sharif, and your listeners who are younger people, who basically are looking for ways that they can be the best that they can be. And something that I haven't seen Kotler talk about, maybe he has, or maybe he's written about it before, is, do we have data yet on if somebody, let's say from their 20s or 30s, young people, start incorporating the insights that we see from Csikszentmihalyi and from Stephen Kotler, how will this affect their brains 30, 40, or 50 years later? And I suspect that because the research is going to show that it really delays a lot of the pathologies that we're talking about. But because this research is so new, I mean, Csikszentmihalyi did his research some years ago, but now people like Stephen Kotler are applying it. We just have not had any studies that look at people using this approach and what happens to them 30 or 40 years later. But I suspect that this is going to show some very positive benefits. And I hope people do this research, maybe some of your listeners, because again, it's something that not just going to help the aging brain, but your listeners who want to be researchers, who want to be entrepreneurs. This is something that's going to help them. So folks, go read this book too.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Virginia in the public comments has made some very important parts. And the one you have up there right before that one is one I wanted to talk about for a minute. Because as you look at it, she talks about the ability to go and look at the different T cell therapies and others like that. And I want to say that some of the advances are actually moving very rapidly. I cannot get in the United States some of the stem cell injections that I want to do here, and so I am considering making a trip to Germany, where I can get some stem cell injections that will help with the ability for my eyes to not age as much, and the ability for my brain not to age as much, and to slow down some of the cell divisions that are happening. And so you see things like that happening, and I believe the advances you're seeing there are going to be fundamental. And these are some of the same type of things that Audrey is looking at in his research centers out in California, that you're seeing others making as well. The ability to use the same type of genetic approaches to even your aging heart has shown tremendous efficacy as it's going forward. But there's also some other elements with there. Your Aging Brain is a pretty good book to look at for this topic. But there is another thing, blog called mindcrowd.org that is excellent in some of these areas that people can use. And I love one of their articles recently that is really geared towards the fact of separating fact from fiction on your brain and the brain aging. They say that by age 70, a person's volume of the brain can shrink about 10, sometimes as much as 15%. But that doesn't mean you've lost cells. What it means is that the size of the cells and the connective tissue around it has shrunk. But actually, in some instances, that concentration actually makes it better. But that's very different from Alzheimer's, what you're talking about earlier, Sharif, where you lose the cells themselves. And that's due to the disease pathology. Where an aging brain, you do not lose the cells themselves, but you begin to they begin to shrink back. And some of the other facts is our neurons don't die off in large numbers, but they do decrease about probably 10%. And we also know that in some instances, our brain can regenerate parts of itself going. And that is where I think some of the most groundbreaking research is also being done there. And that we are seeing ways to help the brain regenerate parts of itself. We know that our cells in our body are constantly dying and being regenerated and stuff like that. And some of the research right now in this neurogenesis is being a lifelong learner actually helps increase the neurogenesis you have in your brain and your body. During meditation, and Sharif, the topic we spoke on earlier this week, music and music therapy, actually that helps increase the neurogenesis of your brain as well. So some of your topics you've come up all interrelate with what we can do as we look at brain aging. And I think the ability you've had to put these together shows that, once again, everything we're talking about doing in our body, in our brain, in society, they're all interconnected. They're all systems of systems. Mm-hmm. And what we do in one part affects the other parts of it. And this is an area where we can, outside of disease, help slow the aging of our brain, to help slow the loss of cognitive capabilities. And it's just that we need to make a determined effort to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, these points are very, very good. I want to double down on them. Lifelong learning, yes, I consider myself a lifelong learner. Whenever I jog, I usually listen to a book or a great course or something, and it stimulates my brain. And by the way, when you jog, you've got a lot more oxygen going to your brain. So a lot of times I'll write when I jog because I got the oxygen going to my brain and I'm making an outline, and then I come home and I hope that the oxygen will stay there, not that I can get my notes down real quick and then write the article that I'm supposed to be writing. Lifelong learning is very important. Yes, meditation is something that across the board, everyone has figured out that kind of way of centering yourself and relaxing yourself and eliminating stress is good for you at all ages, and certainly for people who are getting older. We're not talking about some particular religion or whatever. We're talking about a practice that scientifically has been shown pretty much across the board to be beneficial. By the way, I like what you say, David, about music. I know you did, I think, earlier on this. Both of my daughters have some problems with stress and things like that, and we've got them to go back to doing piano lessons because the music is relaxing. If I were not on this call with you, I would probably have Johann Sebastian Bach going in the background as I'm editing papers. So where you can pick out the music that you want. I like Bach for that. I like Beethoven and Wagner for other things, but that's a whole different discussion. One thing David mentioned, and I think is very important, we touched on this a little bit earlier, is we need to look at the regulatory regime. David mentioned that he may have to go out of the country to get certain stem cell therapy that's not available here because of our Food and Drug Administration. We have a Food and Drug Administration in the United States. It was set up in 1962. There have been a lot of changes in it, but it still takes 10 to 12 years and costs about $3 billion to bring a new product from lab to patient. And a lot of that is to go through the FDA processes, many of which are simply inappropriate for the new technologies we have. I want to give you, since you're talking about the brain, I want to give you an example. I think it was about 2018, 2019. I was supposed to meet with a gentleman who he had taken his wife to Israel to get a particular type of therapy for her Alzheimer's. It had to do with, I think, light and sound that seems to do something to reorganize the brain cells. And he had actually because it was very promising, he actually invested in this company in Israel. And so he had to fly his poor wife over there. They had the therapy. It really seemed to be doing a good job. He came back to the United States, and I was supposed to meet with him. And he was having a meeting with an FDA committee to see if he could get permission to bring this equipment into the United States to use, especially on his wife. And he was so disgusted with the fact that the FDA turned him down, and they just seemed to be complete idiots on this issue. He canceled the meeting, not because he didn't like me and my colleagues, but he was just so disgusted with the process. There is a phenomenon called medical tourism, where people leave the United States to go to another country to get treatments. Now, in some cases, the treatments are not very good. The reason why they're not available in the United States is, in fact, not only they don't work, but they might actually be harmful. They're quacks. But there are a lot of very valid treatments that are not available in the United States that are available elsewhere. And that this is, that's a very serious problem. There was this problem goes back many, many decades. I think it was in the late 1980s. There was a Wall Street Journal headline, 100 million dead, or 100,000 dead, or 100,000 killed. What the story was about was that there's a medication called beta blockers, that if you have a heart attack or that sort of thing, the beta blocker is something that can help that. And while it was available in the United Kingdom, it was not available in the United States because the FDA was saying, well, there's a very, very small chance that you could get cancer if you use this too much. If you're having a heart attack, that's hardly your main concern. And one researcher figured out that something like 100,000 Americans died who could have been saved if beta blockers, which were available in the United Kingdom, had been available in the United States. So there is a whole issue as we get into these innovative technologies, especially ways to treat Alzheimer's and aging brains, that we have a regulatory regime that keeps up with the science so that David here doesn't have to fly to Germany to get his treatments. Or I know a number of other researchers who basically have to go to South America to be patient zero on the things that they've developed in their own labs. So this is where the Asia Pacific countries might be very innovative. Maybe Malaysia will be a place that sets up and says, hey, come to Malaysia. We are the innovators and we allow this kind of regime. And, we don't want frauds, but on the other hand, we want to be innovators in these areas.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I love the dialogue today. Like Virginia says, it's actually, I think, a productive day for people who are listening at what we're doing. And I do want to clarify one or two quick things. A disease like Alzheimer's and your brain changing as you get older are two different things. An aging brain is not a disease. It's a function of life and what goes on with it. It's it's just like the funny concept that as we age, we actually get shorter. And that is not a disease, but it's part of aging. And we see that going forward. And there's a saying that I learned at National Institute of Health that I think is such a really good saying. And it is, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. And I truly believe that. And as you look at it, some of these are things that people don't like to hear, but having a positive diet, doing exercise, being that lifelong learner are good for your heart and good for your brain as well too. And it's actually not just going and watching a movie or playing a video game or something, but it's actually learning. Curiosity and a sense of wonder is what drives an active brain. And if you can keep that sense of awe as you age, if you can sense the fact that, oh, I've heard this and I want to dive deeper, or if I travel and I want to understand the cultures I'm traveling into, and those things, I think that will help your aging brain, your aging body. Uh, uh, Virginia, who's making the comments on the public side, she lives in Brazil. I love going to Brazil and traveling there because, number one, the culture is different, but the food is different. The ability to do things, it forces me to change my schedule. I know when I'm in Brazil, and go out to dinner with people, we often don't go to dinner until 10:30 at night. Boy, by here in Austin, by 10:30 at night, I'm almost ready to go to sleep. And you see stuff like that in different ways. And I can tell you, the first day or two I'm in Brazil, I'm starving by the time we eat at night. But then they eat very differently on other sides, and I partially know that in Brazil their coffee is so strong that it keeps them going, but I don't drink coffee, so I feel really at loss there. But there's even studies that the caffeine in the coffee can be good for your brain and can help stimulate your brain. So again, going back to it, this is an area where there's a lot of things that you can do. But let me clarify something. You've heard me talking about what's good for you, the eating, some of the other elements like that, exercise, the continued learning, the fact that I can take vitamins and supplements to increase it. But doing all these things do not guarantee that you won't ever get a disease of the brain like Alzheimer's. But what they do is they do lower the risk, and they help you maintain your cognitive capabilities. And that's what's very important. Mm-hmm. So Eder and I are not practicing medicine here and prescribing stuff to you, but we're actually looking at where science has played in it. We're looking at where discovery has played. And more importantly, I can tell you, I know I'm probably the oldest one on the broadcast right now. And doing these in my life has helped me increase my ability to learn more. It has helped increase my ability to work and recall more information. And one of the things I think that has helped keep my brain very active is the fact that I don't just learn in my one discipline. I make a conscious effort to look horizontally across many disciplines and connecting the dots, doing that synthesis, which really is a brain function. I think that synthesis has also helped slow the ability of the brain aging to have more of an impact. And I think that has helped me, and I think it will help others as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Edward, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Yeah, well, this has been, again, an excellent and very, very important discussion. A couple of points I'll make. Because we were talking about the regulatory system, I've been working on legislation to amend the FDA, because one of the things that there's a problem is that the FDA doesn't recognize aging as some kind of a disease that can be treated. So if a company comes and says, I have a treatment to deal with mitochondrial degeneration or something like that, the FDA says, well, what is it supposed to be curing? Well, it doesn't cure anything particular, but it's something that if you can deal with mitochondria problems, you will have, less of a chance of getting cancer and a bunch of other things. This is a problem, and I tried to get into legislation that recognizing I think I phrased it as the processes that constitute aging are something that is legitimate, and that our regulators should allow these kinds of medicines and treatments to go forward, so that poor David here doesn't have to fly all the way to Germany to get them. And unfortunately, the members of Congress were very reluctant to keep that in. And of course, the fact that I point out that the members of Congress are all like 85 years old, and probably could use these treatments didn't seem to work, because I guess their aging brains haven't aged very well. But anyway, that is going to be a regulatory fight in the future. But I'll just conclude with a couple of points here. Human beings are defined, at least in biology, as Homo sapiens. That is the man that knows. That's the thing that distinguishes us as humans, is our ability to have conceptual knowledge. We're learning machines. That's how we survive. We understand our environment, and we try to transform the environment to ensure our survival and, of course, our well-being. Learning is something that's not just practical. It's the glory of human beings. It's the thing that we revel in, to understand the world around us. And David's whole point about lifelong learning is so important for making sure that as we age, that basically we age well, and hopefully at some point we will be able to eliminate aging, or at least to put aging off till we're 200 years old or 250. This is not science fiction anymore. I see Zach Richardson is on the call. Hello, Zach, my old friend. There's a whole movement, transhumanism, singularities, and so forth, to deal with these. And this is all part of it. We have such an optimistic future ahead if we will just embrace it, and dealing with the aging brain so our brains continue to function and to be excited about life. Well, that's what we're going for, folks. I say that to Dr. Sharif and to my young friend David.
Thank you. Professor David Smith. Yes.
Well, there's wisdom from the ages is a term that we all learned growing up with, and I think it's still true today. And that is, we look at things like the aging brain, like music therapy, like how do we work with infectious diseases and others like you've been talking about. These are all important. We dramatically last century increased the age expectancy of us. It actually has slowed down in the last 5-7 years. So we've hit a plateau. And I think the science and the research that we're looking at today will push us to the next level of that. I am a professional futurist as well, and when I begin to look at some of those trends, I believe that by the end of this century, our life expectancy will be around 150, 160 years old. Already we have a dramatic increase of the people who are living to above the age 100. And what's very interesting to me is, in really the majority of them, their cognitive abilities, while might be slower, have not diminished. The old saying, "they're smart as a tack," I think still holds true. And sometimes I don't want to get in a debate with them, because they have still the ability to bring hard facts up very rapidly. And so I think that that's not a bad example of our aging brain, and the fact that if we use it, it will stay sharp. If we don't use it, it will diminish even more, just like the muscles do in our body if we don't exercise and do things like that. So that's my real advice, is to help with your aging brain. eat well, take the supplements you need to, uh, exercise your body, exercise your brain. And all of those will make you, as a human being, age better. So, Sharif, thank you. And that's my concluding remark.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Edward and Professor David Smith, for your excellent contribution for today's session, especially for today's topic. I have emotional engagement. I told you I am from Bangladesh. Yes, I live in Malaysia. I'm from very small place, from a very small countries. So 2017, 7 December, my father died. So before my father died, we can understand that he had dementia. uh, I'm one of the unlucky son that I cannot arrange proper treatment for my fathers.
Mhm.
We do not actually, I'm very honest with you, for developing worlds, I can understand the pain. We do not have nothing. For education we need to improve, healthcare we need to improve, many sectors we need to improve. Actually, who can help us? Actually, the developed nations. You have enough knowledge, enough resources, uh, enough technologies. What we can do, we can create trust, we can collaborate, and we can work for human progression. So that's why after my father died, I taking this kind of initiative, and I developed this World Talent Economy Forum. And I want to give a special thanks. We get many good speakers, many good peoples from around the world like today's speakers. So that is the things. Still, more than 3 billion people, they are in remote area, they are in grassroots level. They do not have proper treatment. They do not have electricity. They do not have education. They do not have food safety securities. What else we can do? We can work together, and we can work together for human progression. So I request all of our audience, government agencies, corporations, universities, NGOs, those who working with World Talent Economy Forum, we need to develop a knowledge-oriented society. We need to work together. We need to create real trust. We do not want war, or we do not want any political issues. What Professor Edward said: open markets, open business, open relationship, and make human progressions. Thank you, Professor David Smith and Professor Edward, for your excellent contribution for today's session. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's see.